You're listening to Outcome by Design with Paul Weinstein, a series about the untold stories of the tech world. Let's get into today's episode.
My guest today is Karl Jacob. And to say that Karl is a serial entrepreneur is a massive understatement. Karl is currently co-founder and CEO at LoanSnap, a fast-growing AI-centric fintech company, but that is just the latest chapter in a very long career. Karl has been through at least 4 acquisitions that I know of, including companies that have been acquired by Microsoft, AT&T, and others. In addition, he has raised 23 rounds of financing from major VCs and has generated hundreds of millions in return to investors. In addition to all that, Karl's been an advisor and investor to many startups, including even Facebook in its early days. So, welcome, Karl.
Thank you very much. Great to be here and catch up.
So, again, what we do here at Outcome by Design is try to kind of get a better understanding of the why of things, not the kind of obvious backward-looking analysis that gets written up in business books where you interview 50 founders and see what they all had in common, and that's obviously the wisdom you should carry forward.
Yeah, hindsight's 20/20.
But for me, it's the kind of messy, real-life path, that kind of unsexy version. That's the interesting part for me. That's where the part you're actually going to learn something.
Right.
And so your background is particularly fascinating to me because it's rare to meet someone who's been at the startup thing as long as you have. Usually founders have had some success and they become investors or advisors and give up the operator founder role, but not you, Karl. You are still fighting the good fight, and you're like a startup version of a crack addict. So, what I think is interesting for you is how all those experiences have affected your thinking on new projects. How's the past affected your views towards the future? In my experience, entrepreneurs who've had success early in their careers tend to take the same thing they did last time and just redo it in a different scenario. And, it rarely works.
Right.
And so even if you look at the research, it's shown that, second-time entrepreneurs actually don't really do any better than they did the first time. And so I'm just curious, in your perspective, what does this say, about this startup game we're all playing here? And for you as a founder, multi-time founder, what do you think? Do you think, all your past experiences make you more likely to be successful in the next one?
Well, the more you learn, I guess the more you learn you don't know things, right? And that I think that's one of the big lessons. I guess one of my favorite pieces of feedback I ever got was from Ronnie Lott, who's a football player that some people may know. He said, "Karl, sometimes you got to know when to be a rookie again." And I think that's what the journey's all about when you do multiple companies. The first time you do a company, I think a lot of it comes down to fear, right? You're just scared that it's not going to make it. It's your first one. What if it doesn't make it? And your decisions are driven primarily a lot by like, well, hey, this is life-changing, not just for you, but for everybody involved in the project. And that's a lot of responsibility on a first-time founder. The second time, I think that's eased up a little bit, third, fourth, and fifth for sure. However, things change really rapidly. And so I feel very lucky that I've been able to be around for a lot of these kind of like inflection points and been open enough to be a rookie again and learn and adapt. I do think you carry forward a lot of lessons learned. I certainly wouldn't do some of the things I did in some of my first deals, which I'm sure now you're going to ask me about. But I also have learned that you're always going to learn new lessons. You're going to, like I used to do a lot of martial arts, you're always going to meet a style a little bit different. You're always going to get hit. You're always going to fall down. You're always going to fail. That idea that you're less likely to fail, I think is broken. However, I think your ability and confidence in getting back up and learning from that and growing is much stronger, and you can build companies that are enduring, which is really my goal. How do I help people? And by doing that, how do you build companies that are enduring? And I'll give a really quick example of that from a company everybody knows. So I was fortunate enough to be at Apple early on, and I knew Steve. But I also was fortunate enough to see that story play out differently, kind of like you said. Most people will tell the story of Apple after Steve came back. But the real story of Apple was when Steve left or was fired or whatever movie you want to believe is what really happened. And the interesting thing there is when he came back, when he left a company that had 10 products. When he came back, the first thing he did was take those products down to 2 or 3. That was probably the most anti-Steve thing I've ever seen. He was an innovator, an idea person, and he loved coming up with new things. How did that person get to that point? Well, he learned a really important lesson that he applied, which is more products, more money, more chance for failure. And if you have to borrow that money or raise that money in order to build those products, you're at the behest of your investors. And Steve never wanted to be at the behest of investors again. So when he came back to Apple, he had one mission: build a cash flow machine that would fuel the innovation and ideas that he and the rest of the team had. And here we are today with Apple building cars and AR headsets and the iPhone and the iPad, and no one, and I literally mean no one, can tell them what to do, right? They have enough cash to do whatever they like. I think that's the true legacy of Steve Jobs at Apple, is he learned from the first time around and applied it. Now, he still had failures and they still had issues, as we all know, and still will. But he used that first lesson as a way to inform his second. And I'm hopeful to, follow in those footsteps. I'm not sure anybody will ever be as successful as Steve at doing what he did, but that's the gift of multiple time founders. And he is, like 3, Apple, Next, Pixar-ish, and then Apple again, right? And so I think what he learned is you build a cash flow machine as fast as you can, which is sadly a lesson that a lot of entrepreneurs are learning right now the hard way.
Yeah, but I still think that's one of those confirmation business school book stories. Obviously, you can't argue with Steve's success, but to say what you need to do before you expand your vision is to go out and generate a cash flow generating machine is like, most people can't do that. It's not possible. And it worked out for him, but it also could have just not worked out, right? Everything went in his favor, right? Some of it was under his control and a lot of it wasn't, like for all of us.
Well, I agree. Control is an illusion, you Italian egomaniac. That's a Top Gun line, right? And that's 100% true. And like me, I think as an entrepreneur, you don't control that stuff. You just learn the lesson, apply it as best you can, and roll with the punches. But it's no guarantee. None of it is, and that's why I hate like a lot of this advice you see out there. It's like, well, if you just do this, this, and this, then you'll be successful. If you just have, my favorite these days is, if you just have 24 months of runway, you'll be fine. That's complete bullshit. And I talked to like a lot of the founders. I'm like, I don't want to hear that anymore. And they look at me like, why? I said, everybody wants to know. I said, I want to know when you're going to be profitable. How many months to profitability? That's the metric. Because in 24 months, I don't want to hear you say, I got to raise more money. I want you to say, I don't have to raise money.
Right. It goes against the narrative that, all the current a long time now, 10, 12 years, that entrepreneurs have been fed, by the people with the money, which is that, you want to get as big as you can, as fast as you can, because that's the model that works for the venture community, right? And you can pay lip service to everything else. But in the end, they're all about getting the next Google and Apple, and everybody else who falls along the wayside, that's fine, right? That's just, that's how they make money. But, if you as an entrepreneur, it's a different thing. But, when you're the first time you're doing this, you raise someone gives you a check for what, up until recently was a ridiculous amount of money. That's your mission, right? You've been chosen, you've been selected, you've got this grand vision of how it's all going to be. You won't say you're going to be the next Steve Jobs, but in the back of your mind, it's like, well, maybe it's possible.
Right. Yeah.
And, to resist that and to go ahead and do something different is quite difficult, both for a couple different
reasons. Control your own
destiny
is important.
Yeah. But again, think about this. So the narrative has always been, and I'll ask your advice, if you was going to look at this through somebody else's eyes now, you've raised a bunch of money. Your vision was always a big one, and that's what you've been playing out. So you're spending a lot of money, and in some senses, probably buying growth to look good, right? And sometimes that works if you're Amazon or somebody else, huge, and you've got an unlimited amount of money, and it actually works. But most of the time, there's an end to that runway, right? And so what happens is you've got this great growth story, you've raised a bunch of money, and now, you're afraid that if you cut spending, that growth is just going to, that growth curve is just going to flatten out. And then even if you hit profitability, so what? Because you're now at a company that's just not growing.
Right.
And you've raised a bunch of money. And I mean, what do you do in that situation?
Where you've raised a bunch of money and now the growth is slowed or stopped and you're profitable?
The growth without spending a lot of money, yeah.
Well, I think that's one of the things that, you learn over time, right? You learn that growth isn't growth. True organic growth is magic. Facebook was an example of this. It's just true, raw, organic growth. And that's why Parker hunted Zuck down at Harvard and, tried to join forces with him. He saw it. And Sean was a genius when it came to viral loops and growth. And he hadn't seen anything like it. And I don't know that we have seen anything like it since. So I think it's, as a CEO or founder or even a member of the executive team, understanding that you have to be diligent about what is really driving the growth of the company. Because it's really easy, as you point out, to do a bunch of advertising. It's like, oh, look, organic growth is great. I'm like, oh, great. Shut off the marketing engine. Let's see how organic it really is. And I love the true definition of virality, right? By using it, you share it. And there are very few businesses that are truly like that. And if you're not, well, you might be able to, tweak it around the edges. And there are, like you pointed out, some businesses you can just throw advertising dollars on. You can break through that, but that's a risky strategy. And as you point out as well, that's a 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000. But the way the venture groups operate is like they treat everybody the same, as all of them are going to be able to do that, and that creates all kinds of bad behavior. It created bad behavior in 99, 2000 before the crash there, where we were financing growth through basically the VC ecosystem was paying for it. Even my favorite was sell a 50-pound bag of dog food for $30, but it costs you $32 to ship it. It just was ridiculous. It just wasn't going to work. So I think crypto saw the same thing. That what's the fundamental problem with crypto? No real growth, no real organic, useful use cases. I just talked to a founder yesterday about that, and he's like, "Well, Lido staking is still real." Okay, if Ethereum is real, which I believe it is, and I do think they've done a good job there. But that's pretty thin from where we came from. As there were thousands and thousands of quote growth stories there. And so I think it's sorting through and being hope for the best, but plan for the worst, which is something that I think is a good way to think about it. And in growth, it's like hope that it's organic, but plan that it's not. And by that, I mean, and that's what's going on right now. Like these companies are forced to have organic growth. They're forced to stop spending. And necessity is the mother of invention was something my father taught me really early on. And it's a tough lesson to learn. Once you've learned that once, though, I think you can apply it in the future by hopefully just skirting around that pothole and just not getting addicted to it. Because I'll tell a short story, and I think this really crystallized it for me. Right before the dot-com blowout, I'll never forget a board meeting where a board member took me aside after the board meeting and said, "Hey, you're just not growing fast enough." And I was a young entrepreneur. And I said, "Gosh, we're going 10% week over week in revenue. That's unbelievable, right? And it was on a pretty big number." I remember walking away from that conversation going, man, I screwed up as an entrepreneur. I screwed up as a leader. I'm not growing fast enough. I'm failing the company. The next board meeting, was after the dot-com crash. And that same board member came to me and said, how fast can you cut people and get your burn down? Man, those are fickle winds, right? And so that as an entrepreneur, that made me realize like that was not driven from some kind of like internal knowledge or insight or whatever. That was, feeding the engine and knowing that there'd be another round and they get, better stack, better preference, more liquidation preference, maybe even a ratchet or two in there and stuff like that. It was not actually advice. It was conflicted.
What was that guy's name?
Exactly. There'll be a lot of that. I can't say.
So I'm a little biased here, right? Because, obviously I'm more or less in the M&A business, but, if you look at the stats, 98% of successful venture-backed startups end up exiting through IPOs. That's just the successful ones, not the ones that go away or are zombies.
Right.
And so, if you look at why those companies got acquired, more often than not, particularly for the ones that, make headlines, the ones that everybody wants to emulate, they usually get acquired for something that is above and beyond just kind of what their core business is. So it's somebody's not buying someone's not buying YouTube to make money, selling ads on videos. They're doing it for complex other reasons to protect their own markets, right? And, other versions of that. So, if you're an entrepreneur and you're thinking about this, you've raised a significant sum of money, most likely by now, if you've had any success at all, at least in that part of it. And the only way to have kind of an outsized return that makes you money as the founder and for your team and, your investors is to have, some sort of kind of outsized exit that goes above and beyond kind of what the potential of the revenue that you're bringing in could be.
Right.
And so as you think about this, and the companies that you sold, I'm sure had a good bit of that strategic value aspect of it as well too. Both companies sold to Microsoft and to AT&T. Mostly, you're a big company. You're not thinking, well, I'm going to buy this startup and I can make them 10% more efficient and sell X number more units, and that's why I'm doing it. There's some other bigger reason.
Right.
So, I wonder for your current startup, your past ones, and just thinking about this from the perspective of, an entrepreneur out there now, how do you think about where the value of your business actually lies?
Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Right. So I think it really, first of all, it depends on who you're talking to and making sure you're talking to enough suitors, so to speak. I also think you have to think very deeply about the team and how personal of a decision it is, because I've been involved in a lot of transactions where for the founder or others, it was maybe not as impactful of a transaction, but for the management team or the employees, it absolutely was. And when I give advice along those lines, I often ask entrepreneurs to talk to their management team and talk to even their mid-level staff about like, where are you and what outcome do you want? And I had one particular situation where the CEO did not do that and then found out later on that one of the VPs desperately needed to sell. Not wanted to sell, but actually needed to sell. And he was heartbroken that the company didn't sell. And it did permanent damage. So I think it's a personal thing. I think early on in your career, one of the things that I was very lucky, Ron Conway is an investor in my first company. I think it was one of his first angel investments. And I did not want to sell to Microsoft. And so Sun and Microsoft wanted to acquire us, and I'm like, no way. This is my one. And that's a lot of entrepreneurs think they'll never have another good idea. And I've counseled a lot of them on that. I'm like, yes, you will. You don't think you will, but you will. He drew a curve, and it was kind of a bell-shaped curve. And it says, you're here right now. You sell to Microsoft, and you'll make X. He said, or you'll go raise money. And if you raise money, then the problem is that you'll have to crawl all the way back up that curve. You have to create value to fill the shoes of the valuation that's created by raising that money. And you'll get to the very top of that, and then you have to work your way all the way back down again to get to where you are today. He said, so you should think about that. And I reconsidered selling to Microsoft that day, actually, and ended up selling. And it was because I had recognized that, that 5 years, maybe longer, there was a lot of risk there. And what we had built was amazing and was very valuable at the time, particularly to Microsoft and Sun. And that window might close. And my duty was to, more than me personally, was to my team and to my investors. And, I looked at what's my job? My job is to create value for all those participants in the system. And that was the right decision. And it turned out to be a great decision. We sold for stock and Microsoft stock doubled a year later. So it worked out great for everybody. It doesn't always work out that way, but I agree. You understanding your true worth, particularly, I think one thing that people forget is you often have true worth to companies you've never even heard their names. And it's important for entrepreneurs to consider that in their process. A lot of times the most obvious acquisitions are the ones that will not work out. It's the non-obvious ones that are somewhat magical. I'll give you an example. A company I invested in the hardware space and gave a lot of advice to. The company that ended up acquiring them, there's just no way you would put them down on a piece of paper and you said, who are the potential acquirers of this business? Absolutely not. And yet it's turned out to be a fantastic acquisition for the company and a real boon to the product. Meaning,
right.
It's not going to end up in the same form, but it's going to delight many, many millions of people. And I think probably be, one of those products that we look back on and say, wow, that made sense. But nobody would have seen it 3 years ago when we sold the company.
So how do you think, again, you got all this experience, how do you think about all this now for your current company? How do you think about it for LoanSnap? Are you doing some sort of calculation in the back of your mind, or, it's just go for broke at this point because why not?
I have a really simple rule, and it's partly because of that story from Steve is my number one goal in any company that I'm involved with is get to profitability as fast as possible so you can control your own destiny. And you raise money in order to accelerate the development and the lead times and everything like that. But your ultimate goal is to be that sounds obvious, but when you look at a lot of the companies out there and it's apparently not obvious, that the goal is to get profitable. Once you get there, all of a sudden, people definitely want to give you money, even more, at a higher valuation. But I think the other thing is you've learned the discipline that you need and will need going into the future. So LoanSnap's been on an interesting journey because I guess the best way to put it is we bit off more than we could chew. And we thought, we'll start this thing, we'll get into the mortgage space. It's a $13 trillion space. So it's a big market, tons of inefficiencies, lots of players, and we can do some technology stuff and fix it. And we were just wrong. We fortunately brought on investors who were extremely focused on long-term and building real value. And, it's Steve Anderson at Baseline and Phil Black at True Ventures. And we told them it would be a long, tough road. And I had no idea how long and tough it would be because this industry is insular and broken for a reason. They make tons of money, or did. And because of that, there's no reason to develop technology or make it better. It's like the insurance industry of old. Why would you make insurance better if people were still willing to pay the same amount of money for the product and you could still screw them over the same way you did before? What that led to was a really deep investment in technology, and actually, I hate to even say it, AI, 5 years ago when people didn't care about AI, or even 3 when they didn't care about AI. And that met with a fair amount of resistance. A lot of people are like, look, we don't want change. We don't need change. We can just keep doing the same thing and making tons of money. And I remember a couple of years ago, even some of our investors said, what are you thinking? All these other companies are making tons of money. They're going public and They're doing SPACs. What is wrong with you? And it's kind of similar to when I was at Benchmark, and the whole industry was funding all these companies that were giving stuff away for free, and my thing was like, well, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to build a business that doesn't have a consumer at some point taking money out of their wallet or from their credit card and giving it to a company for a service. Same thing. I'm like, I don't get it. And everyone's like, well, you need to figure it out because these other guys are going to crush you. They're going to get super big. They've got tons of funding. They've raised $500 million, and you've raised at the time 30 or 40. You're dead. And we stuck to our guns, and we built something truly unique and truly different. And now we're reaping the rewards because we've originated $4 billion worth of loans with 40 people. And our closest competitor has 5,000 employees. So I think we're doing something pretty good. And it also has allowed us to innovate. And so we have a new product, we call them these smart loans, that are add-ons to your existing loan so that you don't have to refinance that great rate that you got. And that's all from the technology platform. That's all from that huge investment and our very patient investors who have been with us throughout that. And, we finally turned the corner on both that product and the industry, particularly the buyers of loans, seeing the value in it. We're not there yet, but I think it's a good example. I guess that is one thing you learn. You learn to have patience because timing in startups is often everything. Yeah. Sometimes, like Paul Graham says, you got to be default alive. Because sometimes it's grinding it out. Look at Pinterest. Look at Facebook. People are like, oh my gosh, overnight success. That's crap. It's just not true. It's like the longest overnight success in history. Pinterest, what was it, 6 or 7 years of bouncing around? The long-winded way of saying, I think I've learned a lot along the way, and we're trying to apply a lot of it at LoanSnap. And I can confidently say it's made a huge difference, and we're turning the corner in an industry that's just broken, and we saved our customers $80 million last year. So we're actually making a good impact and building that cash flow machine that will allow us to continue to change financial products to be the benefit of consumers versus the benefit of banks.
Cool. You're going to have a self-driving car soon. I'm going to look forward to that part. All right. So
I love cars. I got to say that's very enticing. In another life, not in my life, I actually broke the world record for the standing mile in a biofuel powered car. And I don't think that's coming back anytime soon, but I'd love to do it in an electric car.
Yeah, fun. All right, so I got one more question for you. I'm going to give you a real life example, someone I've been talking to recently. Okay, so this is a scenario that I think is fairly common right now. Hard to say, hard to believe, but it is true. So this guy is the CEO, founder of a successful company. He's got a couple hundred, maybe 225 people in a reasonably fast-growing space. He's managed to raise, over $180 million. So the last round he did was he got $140 million without even asking. Someone just like, $1 billion valuation, just take my money. And so now he was telling me he's got enough cash for 9-10 years of running, right? Where they are right now.
That's quite a runway.
So he's got a ridiculous runway. He's in a competitive space that is growing, but, he's worried that the growth curve is and is even more going to continue to flatten out because it's sensitive to the economic, structure of the country at the moment. So, he's the founder, the CEO, but he's got a 15 or so % stake. He doesn't control the company. So this company has, all the resources in the world, but the one thing that he doesn't have probably is time, right? He's got a couple years in order to either turn this company profitable or, resume a growth curve that everybody is kind of all on board with. But, he just doesn't know what to do. Should he continue to just kind of keep spending at this point? Should he try to take the company and make it more profitable, but the growth curve flattens and then they're going to kick him out anyway after 2 years? He's kind of, and this is a real life scenario for many entrepreneurs up and down the funding spectrum right now, where, they've got some money, they've got some runway. I know you don't always say that, but but they just don't know what to do. So you're the
Yeah.
genius here. You've done this before. What do you do?
I don't know if I'm the
What do you do
genius.
if you're that guy?
Well, I would say a couple different things. I would challenge the assumption that the board controls the company and the CEO. And I'd challenge it in a way that, well, just look at Facebook. I think that CEOs and founders are important. And I think that boards are designed to advise and drive value to shareholders, but they're also, somewhat conflicted, right? Particularly ones that have a financial interest and particularly ones that have LPs. And so I guess part of me says, look, as a CEO, you can't fall into that trap. Like, well, the board said this, I have to go do this, like the story that I just told. And the board will often encourage you to continue spending money, right? I mean, why not? Because, well, we'll just fund you at a lower valuation later if you fail, or we'll fire you. So I think, I mean, it's hard without all the context, but just taking a stab at it, my advice would be forget about 9-10 years of runway. If you're in a competitive space, figure out if you have a true competitive advantage and use this time like we did at my company post 99-2000. And it was brutal. We ground every vendor we had to dust. And and not in a good way, right? I mean, we walked away from several multi-million-dollar deals. And the scars are still on my back from that. And those are now people who are very powerful in the industry. And they remember, I talked to them. And I think they understand that I did the right thing for the company and I had to. But, when you're telling somebody that you're going to walk from a deal that's going to cause them to miss their quarter in 99-2000 or 2000, 2001, it's brutal. And they don't forget that because that's a pretty impactful thing. So I guess what I would say is act like you don't have that money and grind everybody down as hard as you can. Pay to play, like revenue shares, like all that stuff is coming back in my estimation. But act like you don't have that money. And this is how I did it before, which is we raised a bunch of money at this company. And I remember we raised like $100 million in a round or something like that, which is today nothing. And I remember we threw a party, of course, because that's what you did in 99-2000.
Still.
And yeah, and the investors were there. I said, well, hey, everybody, the really good news is that we raised $100 million. And I said that the bad news is we got to pay it back. And, the room went from jubilant to a little bit more somber. And I said, that's tough, right? Because our investors, and they're right here with me, they want their money back. And then I said, but there's a little bit of a bigger problem. They don't actually want just their money back. They want 10 times their money because those are their economics. So you can look at this, that we raised $100 million and we can throw a party and have fun. Or you can look at it as we raised $100 million, but we owe the bank $1 billion.
Right.
Things got a lot more somber after that. And it was not a very popular talk, to be honest. But it was an important one because, boy, right after that, not right after that, but relatively quickly after that, the wheels came off. And I knew we'd done the right thing when people started saying, well, I'm not going to buy this extra thing or spend this extra money. And our culture just became focused on profitability, even though we had quite a bit of money, well, a lot less, after time, but in the bank. That's the advice I'd give is no matter how much money you have, act like you owe 10 times that to the VCs and then do your runway.
That's a good way of looking at it. I can see you in the office supply, closet counting pens.
Well, I have a funny story because I knew things were going wrong when I got 3 separate requests, and I saw all of that stuff to upgrade our laser printers to the next generation. We just had to do it right now. And I'm like, okay, that's when I knew people knew that we'd raised the money, and I knew something bad was about to happen.
Okay, Karl Jacob's wisdom. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time and sharing some of that with us. It's been great talking to you. I really you've got a lot of stuff that you've been through and you've seen, and I think it really is super valuable for other people to listen and hear. And maybe not directly applicable to everyone because everybody's case is different. But I think just knowing that people have been through this stuff before and there's a path out, and they're not alone, and there are a lot of people fighting the same fight, even if the details aren't the same. I think helps a lot of people, and I think.
Well, I appreciate that, and that's my goal, is to give back, right? I mean, I've been very fortunate, very lucky to have a lot of great, mentors and people like you who have helped me along the way. And so my job is to give back. And I think as well, it doesn't ever get easier, right? I mean, that don't let anybody tell you that. I'm living proof of that. It's still hard. I'm still learning stuff. You play the same game, you're just playing it at a different level. And the cool thing is the outcome could be quite a bit bigger, both for our customers and our company. But I still get stressed before those deal meetings, and I still get the jitters, and I still screw up.
Yeah, it never changes.
Yeah.
Well, again, thank you, Karl, and thank everybody for listening. And please hit the subscribe button, and we'll be talking to you again soon.
Great. Thank you for the time.
You've been listening to Outcome by Design with Paul Weinstein. Don't miss any of our upcoming stories from the tech world. Subscribe to Outcome by Design wherever you get your podcasts. And if you enjoyed this episode, leave us a quick review. You can also send your comments directly to info@paulvweinstein.com. Until next time.